we're seeing as critical as a human capability at a personal level is the ability to be strategic for yourself around exactly those questions, seeing what's emerging and being able to play more thoughtfully into that space in terms of capabilities you'll need in the future.
And to that, I would add that I think in Startup Shakeup and Buy from Northeast Vic, we're saying people have been quoting, we've done 5 years of online development in 8 weeks in response to COVID. So it feels like everybody's just been dumped into this global scale phenomenon that feels like the Wild West in terms of the level of noise has increased exponentially. You know, you curtailed it before because you only were subject to certain, you only had certain doors that you opened to it. And now all of a sudden it feels like every door's open at once and everybody's shouting at once. Yep. Which and some of it feels incredibly relevant. And certainly workplaces are in disruption, so you're looking for things that will help you make sense. So you're open to some of it. And the overall impact is just...
Yep. So overwhelm is another condition that's really important.
I think it kind of comes off of that as well, but I don't know. I guess if this is immediate or emergent, I feel it's immediate, but I don't know. But it's the just a really deep shift in how we think about learning, and then specifically the role of the university, and that being devalued and challenged by Google and industry on the one hand, particularly in certain sectors. You know, don't bother going to uni. We'll train you for 6 weeks and give you a job.
Yep.
And also, you know, the way the government is funding, where they're cutting their funding, and how they've dealt with universities in the last 6 months. And so it's a really interesting scenario that this institution that at one stage was so revered and people were striving for is now really seriously under attack from multiple perspectives. And also the conversation around learning is moving to one, it's really about getting a job. I mean, it was always that. There was always an element of that to learning and education, but it seems to be really shifting to a very transactional learning equals job. Yeah. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but I think all of that together is having a really deep impact on the conversation around learning and education.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is that a shift in values, Margaret? So like, you know, we used to value research, and research could be serendipitous, and if it came out with an outcome that was applicable, that's okay. But now it's been monetarized. You can't do research unless it has an outcome that brings in an income. And so we've lost that whole value of learning for learning's sake. It's now learning or research that has to have an outcome, which, you know, may or may not be the right way to think of it, but it's that shift of away from knowledge as the outcome to money as the outcome.
Yeah, and that's fascinating, because if you step on, because I sort of did the university industry piece, and you know, when you go on one side of that conversation, it's like the weather, right? It's on the one side of the conversation, there's a massive destruction of value in the loss of learning for learning's sake and knowledge for knowledge's sake. But there's another side to that equation where you might speak to a taxpayer, for example, who says, well, I don't value knowledge for knowledge's sake. I want those research outcomes to be applied. And so it's that value, the value in that shifts depending on kind of which side of the table you're on.
And can I ask, who do we have here? Adam, Emma, Jess, Jill, Laura and Leah. Do those sorts of things resonate with you in your workplaces?
Or are there other conditions that you're seeing?
There's a bit to do with universities does actually relate to my work at the moment, but I was going to add just more from the perspective of being a parent. The conditions analysis would be, we are spending a lot more time at home. Our kids, we're all far more reliant on our screens to get information and to interact with people, which is, I loathe. I loathe having everything coming through a screen. My beloved jazz festival is going to be streamed online, and I don't know if I can do it, Adam. I don't know if I can watch a jazz concert online because so much of my life is online. I just don't think I can do it. We have to all learn online, through the screen. We have to connect with other people through the screen, and it's just driving me nuts. And our networks, our social networks have changed as well. I'm much more reliant on my colleagues for social interaction than I am with my friends, because I can't see them at the moment.
Yeah, that's really important. Yeah.
And Leah said something here about, she can't use the audio. Organisationally, the immediate impact for Leah is addressing the notion of recovery in the old ways. Building infrastructure is a priority, which seems very narrow in focus.
Yeah, I've got a really basic one, which is border closures. Having a huge impact in relation, particularly for here, Beechworth and Northeast Victoria, but also that whole thing about as having a literally smashing effect on business, tourism and the like. And there's a thing related to that, I think, which is nearly like Victoria being the bad guys, and being dumped on from all sorts of angles. So there's that whole literal ability to move is actually really constrained. And I think that's actually been a very difficult space.
One thing I'd add to that, Narelle, is that I know when I'm talking to Charles Sturt, who are in New South Wales University, and I say, please, when you're sending out messages saying we're all going back to uni and all the rest of it, bear in mind that you've got thousands of staff and students in Victoria, because we've had bushfires, loss of wine crop, loss of timber crop, loss of tourism, COVID once, no Easter, COVID twice, no long weekend, we're still in lockdown, we've had homeschooling, and they go, oh, wow, I had no idea. Yep. So whereas early in the pandemic, there was this real feeling of we were all in this together, everybody else is now getting on with their lives. Yep. Whereas Victoria, it feels a bit like being in the zone in Cleverman, where we all turn into the hairies who have to sort of exist somehow in the zone. Right. And that's just us here, and we have some freedom compared to, say, people in Melbourne.
Exactly right.
Just one to call out there as well, the bushfires in the background, and there's two pieces to that. One is they've sort of receded to the background in terms of the implications, sort of lost in the COVID thing, but the other, of course, is they're looming in the background as we head into our next bushfire season, which may or may not be problematic. It's maybe a bit early to tell, but that doesn't go away as an overall condition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Sorry, I cut someone off there.
Oh, I was just going to say a very simple condition, probably not as complex as what you're talking about, but that affects both organisation and community is just, say, remote working. It has changed the whole way the organisation operates, but it also has changed how we move within our communities. So more localised shopping, not necessarily accessing, say, regional city supermarkets and things like that. So as you say, a condition that may have both positive and negative impacts.
Absolutely. And there's some subtlety there starting to emerge between the distinctions around remote working and hybrid working. And so there's actually a couple of conditions in there to be thinking about. The hybrid working is starting to be understood as what will emerge in terms of people working out of the office for some portion of time and then being in the office another portion of time. The remote working is starting to push a bit towards people being able to work anywhere from anywhere. So you could, in theory, be employed in San Francisco and live in Benalla as a remote worker, just as an example.
Yeah, good luck with those timelines.
An impact that's had, David. Sorry, go ahead.
I actually have been doing, I'm one of the few people, it sounds like in this discussion, who actually has been able to continue working physically on site. And I have found the ability to do online webinars and learning actually a great advantage, especially with the various closures. Being dirty Victorians, as everybody seems to think we are, it makes it very hard to go to South Australia, where the wine industry is based, and they run everything out of South Australia or Mildura, or you can't get there. It's great to be able to get on to webinars and stuff like that and find positive aspects of it. So it's not all negative having to be forced online sometimes. Sometimes there has been some positive learnings out of it from me. Other conditions, though, that we found is obviously to operate back to some of what they're calling closer to COVID normal. The amount of extra work you have to do in order to operate, from record keeping all the way down to cleaning, is quite significant, and having to realise all those sorts of things has been interesting, and some people have been very good and very on board, other people not so much. And it's interesting hearing stories from the customers, and you shake your head about what has been going on around the place. But you know, that's an interesting thing. And on top of all of that, there's other parts of life which is going on elsewhere in the country in terms of various decisions making, which you then have to refer to, which aren't, you know, there are businesses, there are parts of operations going on which aren't even taking into what's happening with COVID and stuff like that. They're just business as normal. There are the aspects going on, and you've got to recognise that who you're talking to at the particular time, and realise, as was so before said, people in New South Wales, that's normal land. We're not living in normal land. Maybe sometimes just talk to somebody in the UK, or and if we reckon it's confused here, talk to those guys. It's bloody confusing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So what I want to reinforce, and there's some great points there, Stephen. One really critical condition I heard was COVID normal operating burden, right? Which is just what is all the extra stuff we have to do. Now, one of the things that we try to do is what shows up on the maps are things like that. So you'd have COVID normal operating burden would turn up, and that could be internal. It might also be state, and conditions can appear on multiple scales. You don't have to get overly fixed on is what's the best place to put it and go into multiple locations. What we then would suggest you do is when you go into, if you keep a conditions log or something like this, is that you'd have over here your COVID normal operating burden, then just a couple of points to reinforce what that is. The whole intention of conditions analysis is for people to very quickly align to context. So if on your map here, you can say, look, here's our internal conditions, and people can go, yeah, we get all that, but I'm not sure what is possible demand surge post-COVID lockdown. What does that really mean? We'll go have a look at the other documentation that'll tell you a bit more about that. So what you're trying to do visually is align people very quickly to the reality that they're in. The way we do it with this visualization is you put your immediate conditions over here and your emergent out here, just so you can get a sense of, and if you get a bit more sophisticated in a relatively unsophisticated tool, you might push something, you know, right out to the edge because it's truly an emerging condition. Now, I'm conscious of time. What I wanted to get people to really start practicing in that is just speaking to the conditions, right? Because we're going to send you away to do a bit of conditions analysis work. And what I'd recommend that you do is, if you can do it at some sort of scale with a team, if you're an organization where you've got others around you, just have a semi-structured conversation with the team. This is really simple. We're just talking about the weather that we're operating in, right? So if it's raining, if there's a cyclone 3 weeks out, or not, wouldn't be 3 weeks, but 3 or 4 days out, that's an emerging condition. So let's just talk about the context that we're in. What's happening inside our organization? People are exhausted. What's emerging? A changing work environment as we go to a hybrid model. That's internal to the organization. What about at a regional scale? And you might think about doing it at a regional scale for this map here rather than state national. You might have something regional. What's happening in the region? Well, we've got industry under stress.